The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse as Karoline Leavitt walked up the wide marble steps. She was 28 years old, with straight brown hair that fell just past her shoulders. Today she wore a neat navy blue suit, low heels that clicked softly on the polished floor, and a small gold cross that hung from a thin chain around her neck. The cross caught the light as she moved. It had been her grandmother's final gift to her before passing away last spring. Karoline checked her watch. She was 30 minutes early for the routine filing she needed to handle for her law firm. Being early was a habit she had developed in law school. She liked having time to gather her thoughts before any legal proceeding, even one as simple as today's task. The security guard at the metal detector nodded at her as she placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt. "Morning, Miss Leavitt. Back again so soon." "Good morning, Pete." "Yes. Just another filing for the Westbrook case," she replied with a smile. Karoline was well known at the courthouse after 3 years of working as a law clerk and now as a junior attorney at Mason and Fletcher, a respected local firm. Pete glanced at the paper in his hand. "Looks like you're in courtroom 3 today. Judge Morris is presiding." Karoline's smile faded slightly. Judge Henry Morris had a reputation for being strict and sometimes difficult. She had appeared before him only twice before, and both times he had been formal and cold. "Thanks for the heads up, Pete," she said, collecting her belongings and heading toward the elevator. In the elevator, Karoline mentally reviewed what she needed to do. The filing was straightforward, just some standard paperwork for an ongoing civil case. She should be in and out in 20 minutes. As the doors opened on the 3rd floor, she straightened her jacket and touched her grandmother's cross briefly for luck, a habit she had developed in recent months. Courtroom 3 was already busy with the morning calendar. Lawyers in dark suits stood in small groups, talking quietly while waiting for their cases to be called. Court staff moved efficiently around the room, preparing for the day. Karoline nodded to a few familiar faces as she made her way to the clerk's desk at the front. "I have a filing for the Westbrook case," she said quietly to the clerk, a middle-aged woman named Rita, who had worked at the courthouse for decades. Rita looked up with a friendly smile. "Morning, Karoline. Let me see those papers." She reached for the folder Karoline handed over. Just then, a side door opened, and Judge Henry Morris entered the courtroom. Everyone immediately fell silent and stood. The judge was tall with silver, hair cut short and neat. He had sharp blue eyes behind reading glasses and a permanently stern expression. He wore the traditional black robe that seemed to make him even more imposing. "Be seated," he said in his deep voice as he took his place at the bench. The court bailiff called the room to order, and the day's proceedings began. Karoline sat quietly, in the front row, waiting for her turn. She listened as Judge Morris dealt efficiently with case after case, his tone businesslike and sometimes impatient with attorneys who weren't fully prepared. After about 15 minutes, Rita caught her eye and motioned her forward. "Your Honor, we have a filing in the Westbrook case from Mason and Fletcher," Rita announced. Judge Morris looked up as Karoline approached the bench. His eyes narrowed slightly as his gaze fell on her. For a moment, she thought he was recognizing her from previous appearances. Then she realized he was staring at her necklace, the small gold cross visible against her white blouse. "Ms. Leavitt, is it?" he asked, his voice suddenly cool. "Yes, Your Honor," Karoline replied, placing her documents on the table before him. Judge Morris ignored the papers. "Ms. Leavitt, are you aware of the strict separation between church and state that we maintain in this courtroom?" The question caught Karoline off guard. "I'm sorry, Your Honor." The judge pointed to her necklace. "That religious symbol has no place in a government facility. This is a secular courtroom." A hush fell over the room. Karoline felt her cheeks grow warm as every eye turned toward her. "Your Honor, this is a personal item of jewelry. It was my grandmother's. I don't care about its sentimental value, Ms. Leavitt." Judge Morris interrupted. "My courtroom, we maintain absolute neutrality regarding religious displays. Please remove it." Karoline's hand went to the cross. She had worn it every day since her grandmother's funeral. It was small and unobtrusive, just a simple gold cross on a thin chain. She had never considered it might be seen as inappropriate in a professional setting. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't believe wearing a personal religious symbol violates any courthouse policy or law," she said carefully. Her heart was beating faster now, but her voice remained steady. Judge Morris's expression hardened. "Are you refusing a direct instruction from this bench, Ms. Leavitt?" The courtroom was completely silent now. Karoline could feel everyone watching. A more experienced attorney might have simply tucked the necklace inside her blouse to avoid conflict, but something about the judge's tone, the unfairness of his demand, her stand her ground. "I'm not refusing, Your Honor. I'm respectfully noting that personal religious expression through jewelry is protected under the First Amendment," she said. Several attorneys in the gallery exchanged glances. No one challenged Judge Morris like this, especially not a young attorney on a routine matter. The judge's face flushed slightly. He removed his glasses and fixed Karoline with a cold stare. "Ms. Leavitt, you are in contempt. I am issuing a fine of $500 for inappropriate religious display in a government facility and for arguing with this court." He scribbled something on a form and handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to Karoline. She accepted the citation with steady hands, though. Inside, she felt a mix of shock and anger. "Do you have anything else to say, Ms. Leavitt?" Judge Morris asked, his tone suggesting she should not. "No, Your Honor," she replied quietly. "I'll submit the filing to the clerk." "See that you do." "Next case," the judge said, already looking past her. Karoline returned to Rita's desk and handed over her documents. The clerk gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. As Karoline turned to leave, she noticed several attorneys watching her with expressions ranging from pity to respect in the hallway outside. A middle-aged attorney named Greg Benson caught up with her. He had been in the courtroom and had witnessed everything. "That was completely out of line," he said quietly. "Morris has always been strict, but that was beyond the pale." Karoline looked down at the citation in her hand. $500 for wearing my grandmother's cross? Are you going to pay it?" Greg asked. She thought for a moment, then shook her head slowly. No, I don't think I will." What Judge Morris didn't know, what no one in that courtroom except Rita the clerk knew, was that before joining Mason and Fletcher, Karoline had graduated at the top of her class from Harvard Law School. Her specialty had been First Amendment cases, with a particular focus on religious freedom issues. For her final paper, she had written an extensive analysis of religious expression in government settings that had been published in the Harvard Law Review. As Karoline walked toward the elevator, her initial shock was giving way to determination. Judge Morris had chosen the wrong person to make an example of. She pulled out her phone and called her boss. "Dan, it's Karoline. Something just happened in Judge Morris's courtroom that you should know about." She explained the situation briefly. "I want to challenge this, not just for myself, but because it's wrong." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, her boss said, "Use whatever resources you need. The firm will back you on this." As the elevator doors closed, Karoline touched her grandmother's cross again. What had started as a routine morning had turned into something much more significant. Judge Henry Morris had no idea what he had just started, or that he had just found someone who knew more about religious freedom, law, than perhaps anyone else in the state. Karoline arrived at her apartment just after 7 that evening. She set her briefcase down on the kitchen counter and kicked off her shoes. The day had been long and frustrating. After the incident in Judge Morris's courtroom, she had returned to her law firm and spent hours explaining what had happened to the partners. "Karoline, is that you?" Her roommate Natalie called from the living room. Natalie Owens was a nurse at the local hospital. They had been friends since college and had shared this apartment for 3 years. "Yes, it's me," Karoline replied, walking into the living room. "And you wouldn't believe the day I've had." Natalie was sitting on the couch with a bowl of pasta. She took one look at Karoline's face and set her dinner aside. "What happened? You look upset?" Karoline sank into the armchair across from her. "A judge fined me $500 today for wearing my grandmother's cross necklace in his courtroom." "He did what?" Natalie's eyes widened. "Can he even do that?" "That's exactly what I'm going to find out." Karoline's voice was calm but determined. Touch the cross that still hung around her neck. "This isn't just about me or the money. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of the law." Natalie knew that tone. It was the same one Karoline had used when she decided to apply to Harvard. Law, despite everyone telling her it was too competitive. "So what are you going to do?" "Research. Lots of research." Karoline stood up and headed toward her bedroom. Could you make some coffee? It's going to be a long night. 20 minutes later, Karoline had changed into comfortable clothes and transformed her small bedroom into a research center. Her desk was covered with legal textbooks, and her laptop was open to a legal database. Natalie brought in a large mug of coffee and set it beside her. Thanks, Karoline said without looking up. She was already deep in her research, typing rapidly and making notes on a yellow legal pad. Do you want me to order some food? Natalie asked. That would be great, Karoline said, reaching for another book. I'm going to be at this for hours. Natalie left the room. Karoline focused on her work. She started by reviewing Supreme Court cases related to religious expression in government settings. She knew there were numerous precedents supporting her position, but she needed specific cases that directly addressed personal religious symbols in courtrooms. She found several promising cases. In Capitol Square Review Board v. Panett, the Supreme Court had ruled that private religious expression in a public forum did not violate the Establishment Clause. In Good News Club v. Milford Central School, the court had emphasized that religious speech was protected under the First Amendment, but the case that really caught her attention was a more recent one involving a court clerk in Georgia who had been disciplined for wearing a small crosspin. The appeals court had ruled in the clerk's favor, stating that passive religious symbols worn by individuals do not constitute government endorsement of religion. Karoline made detailed notes on each case, highlighting the key points that supported her position. She also researched Judge Morris himself, looking for any pattern of similar rulings or any history of complaints against him regarding religious issues. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang. It was Patricia Hernandez, one of the senior partners at her firm. Patricia had been Karoline's mentor since she joined Mason and Fletcher. Karoline, I just heard what happened today, Patricia said. Don filled me in. Are you okay? I'm fine, Karoline assured her, just angry and determined. Good, because I want you to know the firm is fully behind you on this. Judge Morris overstepped and he needs to be checked. What's your plan? Karoline explained the research she was doing and her intention to file an appeal against the fine. I want to challenge the constitutionality of his ruling. It's a clear violation of my First Amendment rights. I agree, Patricia said. And I think we should take it a step further. This could be an important case for establishing clear guidelines about religious expression in courtrooms. With your background in First Amendment law, you're the perfect person to lead this. They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing strategy and next steps. Patricia offered to help with the appeal and to accompany Karoline when she filed it. Get some rest tonight, Patricia advised before hanging up. Tomorrow, we'll start drafting the appeal. But Karoline didn't rest. After eating the dinner Natalie had ordered, she went back to her research. She wanted to be thorough, to anticipate every argument Judge Morris might make in his defense. This wasn't just about winning. It was about creating a solid legal precedent that would protect others in the future. As midnight approached, Natalie knocked on her door. You should get some sleep, Karoline. You look exhausted. Just a little longer, Karoline said, rubbing her eyes. I need to finish reviewing these cases. Natalie sighed but didn't argue. She knew how dedicated Karoline was when she set her mind to something. Don't stay up all night, okay? But that's exactly what Karoline did. As the hours passed, her determination only grew stronger. The more she researched, the more convinced she became that Judge Morris had made not just an unfair ruling, but an unconstitutional one. By 5 in the morning, her desk was covered with notes, and she had drafted an outline for the appeal. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but her mind was clear. She had found 15 separate cases that supported her position, and she had identified the key legal arguments she would make. When Natalie got up at 6 to prepare for her early hospital shift, she found Karoline in the kitchen making more coffee. Did you sleep at all? Natalie asked, though the answer was obvious from the dark circles under Karoline's eyes. No, but it was worth it. Karoline held up her notes. I've got everything I need to fight this. You really care about this, don't you? It's not just about... The fine Karoline shook her head. It's about standing up for what's right. Judge Morris abused his power yesterday. If no one challenges him, he'll keep doing it to others. After Natalie left for work, Karoline took a quick shower and changed into fresh clothes. Despite her lack of sleep, she felt energized. She called Patricia to update her on her progress. "I've drafted an outline for the appeal," she told her mentor. "I think we should file it as soon as possible, before Judge Morris has time to prepare a defense." "Agreed," Patricia said. "I can meet you at the courthouse at 10. We'll file it together." At 9:30, Karoline arrived at the Mason and Fletcher offices to print all the necessary documents for the appeal. Don Miller, the managing partner, stopped by her desk. "I heard about your run-in with Judge Morris," he said. "The whole firm is talking about it. Are you sure you want to take this on?" "Morris has a lot of influence in this district." "I'm sure," Karoline said firmly. "I appreciate the firm's support." Don nodded. "Just be careful. Maurice doesn't like to lose, and he has friends in high places." At 10 o'clock, Karoline met Patricia at the courthouse steps. Patricia was in her 50s, with short gray hair and the confident manner of someone who had won many legal battles. She gave Karoline an approving look as she reviewed the appeal documents. "This is excellent work, especially on such short notice," she said. "You've cited all the right cases, and your arguments are sound. Judge Morris won't know what hit him." Together, they entered the courthouse. Karoline noticed that she was getting curious looks from the security staff and other attorneys. Word had obviously spread about her confrontation with Judge Morris. "Looks like you're famous," Patricia said with a smile as they headed to the clerk's office to file the appeal. Stephen Grant, the court clerk responsible for appeals, raised his eyebrows when they handed him the documents. "An appeal against Judge Morris? That's rare." He flipped through the pages, his expression changing to one of respect as he saw the depth of legal research. "Very rare indeed." As they left the clerk's office, Karoline felt a sense of satisfaction. The first step had been taken. Now she would see if the legal system she had devoted her life to studying would uphold the principles it was founded on. "What happens next?" she asked Patricia as they walked out of the courthouse. "Now we wait for a hearing date," Patricia replied. "We prepare for battle. Judge Morris won't take this lying down." Karoline nodded, touching her grandmother's cross. The fight was just beginning, but she was ready for it. Word about Karoline's appeals spread quickly through the courthouse. By lunchtime, many of the court staff and local attorneys had heard about the young lawyer who dared to challenge Judge Morris. Some thought she was brave. Others thought she was foolish. Judge Morris had been on the bench for 15 years and had a reputation for holding grudges. Karoline was eating a sandwich at her desk when her office phone rang. It was Stephen Grant from the court clerk's office. "Ms. Leavitt, I wanted to let you know that your appeal has been assigned to Judge Alan Peters in Court 5. The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today at 10 a.m. "Thank you, Stephen," Karoline said, making a note of the date and time. That was fast. "Judge Peters requested it specifically," Stephen said, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I think he's interested in the constitutional questions your case raises." After hanging up, Karoline immediately called Patricia to share the news. "Judge Peters." "That's good," Patricia said. "He's fair, and he knows the law. He won't be intimidated by Morris." "Have you ever argued before him?" Karoline asked. "Many times. He's tough, but reasonable. He'll give us a fair hearing." Patricia paused. "But we need to be prepared for Morris to fight back hard. He won't want to be embarrassed." As if on cue, Karoline's email pinged with a new message. It was from Judge Morris's office, a formal response to her appeal. She opened it and quickly scanned the contents. "Patricia Maurice just responded to our appeal. It's claiming judicial discretion in maintaining courtroom decorum and citing 3 cases to support his position." "Send me the email," Patricia said. "I want to see what cases he's using." Karoline forwarded the email and then read through Judge Morris's arguments more carefully. He was claiming that personal religious displays could be restricted in a courtroom, setting to maintain the appearance of judicial neutrality. It wasn't a strong argument, but it wasn't completely without merit either. For the next 2 weeks, Karoline divided her time between her regular caseload and preparing for the appeal hearing. She worked late every night, refining her arguments and anticipating Judge Morris's counterpoints. Patricia met with her regularly, offering advice and helping her prepare for the questions Judge Peters might ask. The day before the hearing, Karoline stayed at the office until nearly midnight, reviewing everything one last time. She was packing up to leave. Dan Miller, the managing partner, stopped by her office. "All set for tomorrow?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Karoline replied, closing her laptop. Dan nodded. "The whole firm is behind you, you know. Win or lose, what you're doing matters." He hesitated, then added, "Judge Morris called me today." Karoline looked up sharply. "What did he want?" "He suggested that it would be better for everyone if you withdrew your appeal, implied that pursuing it might not be good for the firm's relationship with the court." "That sounds like a threat," Karoline said, feeling her anger rise. It was carefully worded, but yes, that was the implication. Don smiled tightly. "I told him that Mason and Fletcher stands behind its attorneys when they're in the right, and that we look forward to seeing him in court tomorrow." Karoline felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Dan." He waved it off. "Get some rest tonight. You'll need a clear head tomorrow." But rest didn't come easily. Karoline tossed and turned, her mind racing through arguments and counter-arguments. When her alarm went off at 6, she had slept only a few hours, but adrenaline kept her alert as she showered and dressed for court. She chose her outfit carefully, a conservative gray suit, minimal makeup, and of course her grandmother's cross necklace displayed openly against her white blouse. Today the cross wasn't just jewelry. It was a statement. Natalie was in the kitchen when Karoline emerged from her room. "Big day," she said, handing Karoline a cup of coffee. "You look ready?" "For battle." "I feel ready," Karoline said, sipping the coffee gratefully. "Nervous, but ready." "The hospital staff is rooting for you," Natalie said. "I told everyone about your case. Even Dr. Rivers, who never takes sides on anything, said you were right to challenge the judge." Karoline smiled, touched by the support. "Thanks, Nat. That means a lot." She arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early. Patricia was already waiting for her on the steps, looking sharp in a navy blue suit. "How are you feeling?" Patricia asked as they walked in together. Confident, Karoline said, "I know we're right on the law," as they passed through security. Pete the guard gave Karoline a thumbs up. "Good luck today, Ms. Leavitt." Inside, they found Court 5 already filling up. News of the hearing had attracted many local attorneys who were curious to see the confrontation. Karoline noticed several reporters as well, including one from the local legal journal, at 5 minutes to 10. A side door opened, and Judge Morris entered. He wasn't wearing his judicial robes today. As the subject of the appeal, he was there as a party to the case, not as a judge. He was accompanied by a court attorney named Edward Bell, who would be representing him. Judge Morris's face was expressionless as he took his seat, but Karoline noticed he glanced briefly at her cross necklace dot at exactly 10 o'clock. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Alan Peters entered. He was younger than Morris, maybe in his early 50s, with a thoughtful face and attentive eyes. He nodded to the room and took his seat at the bench. "We are here today for the matter of Leavitt v. Morris, an appeal of a contempt fine issued in Judge Morris's court," Judge Peters began. "Ms. Leavitt, as the appellant, you may present your case first." Karoline rose and approached the podium. She had argued in court many times before, but never in a case that felt so personal. She took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, this case is about the fundamental right to religious expression protected by the First Amendment. 2 weeks ago, I appeared in Judge Morris's courtroom wearing a small cross necklace, a personal item of religious significance. Judge Morris ordered me to remove it, claiming it was an inappropriate religious display in a government facility. When I respectfully noted that personal religious expression through jewelry is constitutionally protected, he'd fine me $500 for contempt." Judge Peters listened attentively as Karoline presented her legal arguments. She cited the Supreme Court, cases she had researched, explaining how they establish protection for passive religious symbols worn by individuals. She was clear and concise, avoiding legal jargon when possible, and making her points in simple, direct language. "The First Amendment protects both the free exercise of religion and free speech," she concluded. "My wearing a small cross necklace violates no law or court rule. It does not disrupt court proceedings or impose religion on others. It is simply a personal expression of my faith, and it is protected by the Constitution. We ask that the fine be overturned and that clear guidelines be established to protect the religious expression rights of all court participants." As Karoline returned to her seat, she noticed several attorneys in the gallery nodding in agreement. Patricia gave her an approving smile. Judge Peters then turned to Edward Bell, counsel for Judge Morris. "You may present your response." Was a skilled attorney, but his arguments seemed weak compared to Karoline's well-researched presentation. He focused on judicial discretion and the need for courtrooms to appear neutral on religious matters. Several times during his presentation, Judge Peters interrupted with probing questions that Bell struggled to answer convincingly. When Bell finished, Judge Peters asked Karoline if she wished to offer a rebuttal. She did, briefly addressing each of Bell's main points and reinforcing her constitutional arguments. As the hearing concluded, Judge Peters looked thoughtfully at both parties. "This case raises important constitutional questions that deserve careful consideration. I will issue my ruling within 1 week. Court is adjourned." As they gathered their papers, Patricia whispered to Karoline, "You were excellent, clear, persuasive, and right on the law. Peters was engaged with your arguments." I noticed Judge Morris watching them from across the room, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and left without a word. Outside the courtroom, several reporters approached Karoline for comments. "Ms. Leavitt, do you think this case could set a precedent for religious expression in courtrooms?" one asked. Karoline considered her answer carefully. "I believe it's important to clarify that the Constitution protects personal religious expression, even in government settings. This isn't about challenging the separation of church and state. It's about protecting individual rights." As Karoline and Patricia walked down the courthouse steps, Karoline felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The hearing was over, but the outcome was still uncertain. One thing was clear, though, no matter what Judge Peters decided. She had stood up for what she believed was right, and in doing so, she had reminded herself why she had become a lawyer in the first place. The week after the hearing passed slowly for Karoline. She tried to focus on her other cases, but her mind kept returning to the appeal. Every time her office phone rang, she wondered if it was the court calling with Judge Peters' decision. On Wednesday afternoon, Patricia stopped by her office. "Any word yet?" Karoline shook her head. "Nothing." "Do you think that's a bad sign?" "Not at all," Patricia assured her. "Peters is thorough. It's probably writing a detailed opinion. That's good for us, especially if we want to set a clear precedent." By Friday, the waiting had become almost unbearable. Karoline checked her email constantly and jumped whenever her phone rang. When she left the office that evening, she felt discouraged. "Try to enjoy your weekend," Patricia advised. "The ruling will come when it comes." But on Saturday morning, as Karoline was having coffee with Natalie, her cell phone rang. It was Stephen Grant from the court clerk's office. "Ms. Leavitt, Judge Peters has issued his ruling on your appeal. He asked me to call you personally." Karoline's heart raced. What did he decide? "He ruled in your favor," Stephen said, and Karoline could hear the smile in his voice. "The fine has been overturned. Judge Peters wants you to know that a formal written opinion will be available on Monday, but he authorized me to inform you of the outcome today." "Thank you, Stephen," Karoline said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, she looked at Natalie, who was watching her anxiously. She said simply, and then the tears came. They weren't sad tears, but tears of relief and vindication. Natalie hugged her tightly. "I knew you would." It's calls for a celebration. Karoline spent the rest of the weekend fielding congratulatory calls and messages. Patricia was thrilled, Dan was proud, and even some of the court staff sent discreet messages of support. By Monday morning, Karoline felt like she was walking on air as she entered the courthouse to pick up a copy of Judge Peters' written opinion. Stephen handed her the document with a smile. 20 pages. "I think that's a record for an appeal on a contempt fine." Karoline took the opinion to a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby and began to read. Judge Peters had been thorough indeed. He had addressed each of Judge Morris's arguments and systematically dismantled them using Supreme Court precedents and constitutional principles. One paragraph in particular caught her attention: the wearing of a small, obtrusive religious symbol such as Ms. Leavitt's cross necklace falls squarely within the protection of the First Amendment. It represents personal religious expression that does not disrupt court proceedings, does not constitute government endorsement of religion, and does not infringe upon the rights of others. Judge Morris's order to remove the necklace and subsequent contempt fine were not only an overreach of judicial authority, but a direct violation of Ms. Leavitt's constitutional rights. Judge Peters hadn't stopped there. He had gone on to establish clear guidelines for religious expression in courtrooms within the district, specifically protecting the right of attorneys, witnesses, jurors, and other court participants to wear religious symbols as long as they did not disrupt proceedings. As Karoline read the final pages, she felt a growing sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for religious freedom that would benefit many others. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't notice Judge Morris approaching until he was standing right in front of her. She looked up, startled. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice formal but not hostile. "May I speak with you?" "Of course, Judge Maurice," she replied, closing the opinion. He gestured toward a nearby empty conference room. "Perhaps somewhere more private?" Karoline followed him into the room, unsure what to expect. Was he angry? Planning to threaten her career? She touched her cross necklace for reassurance. Judge Morris closed the door and turned to face her. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied her face. Then, to her surprise, he extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, Miss Leavitt." Hesitantly, Karoline shook his hand. "I appreciate that, Your Honor." Judge Morris sighed and sat down at the conference table. "I've been on the bench for 15 years. Sometimes I think I forget that the law isn't just about rules and order. It's about protecting individual rights, even when those rights make us uncomfortable." He gestured for her to sit, and she did, still wary but curious. "I've read Judge Peters' opinion," Maurice continued. "It's well-reasoned and firmly grounded in constitutional law. I was wrong to order you to remove your necklace, and I was wrong to fine you for refusing." Karoline hadn't expected this. Had prepared for anger, for resentment, but not for admission of error. "Thank you for saying that, Judge," she said. "I want you to know that this wasn't personal. It was about the principle." "I know," he said. "Your legal arguments were excellent, by the way." Peters mentioned in his opinion that your brief was exceptionally well-researched and persuasive. That's high praise from him. They talked for nearly 30 minutes. To Karoline's surprise, the conversation evolved into a thoughtful discussion about the balance between institutional neutrality and individual religious expression. Judge Morris was knowledgeable and, when not being defensive, quite insightful. "You know," he said as their conversation drew to a close, "we need more attorneys like you, Ms. Leavitt. Attorneys who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." When Karoline returned to her office, she found a small crowd waiting for her. Dan, Patricia, and several other attorneys from the firm had gathered to congratulate her. There was a cake on the conference room table and a bottle of champagne. To Karoline, Dan said, raising his glass after the champagne was poured, "who reminded us all what it means to be a lawyer." Later that afternoon, as the celebration wound down, Patricia pulled Karoline aside. "I got a call from Diane Baldwin at Constitutional Rights Partners in Washington. She read about your case in the legal journals and was impressed. They're looking for someone with your expertise in religious freedom cases." Karoline was stunned. Constitutional Rights Partners was one of the most prestigious civil rights firms in the country. "They want to interview me." "They want to offer you a job," Patricia corrected with a smile. "It would be a big step up, Karoline. They handle landmark cases that shape the law for generations." "But what about Mason and Fletcher?" "I can't just leave after everything you've done for me." Patricia squeezed her arm. "We'd miss you, of course. But this is an opportunity you can't pass up. And honestly, after what you've accomplished here, you're ready for bigger challenges." That evening, Karoline sat in her apartment, turning the business card Patricia had given her over in her hands. Constitutional Rights Partners in Washington, D.C., it was a dream opportunity. A chance to work on cases that truly mattered on a national scale. Natalie found her still sitting there, lost in thought. "Earth to Caroline," she said, waving a hand. In front of her face, "Where did you go?" Caroline looked up and smiled. "Washington, I think." "Washington? What's in Washington?" As Caroline explained about the job offer, Natalie's eyes grew wide. "You have to take it," she said when Caroline finished. "This is what you've always wanted, to make a real difference with your law degree. But it means leaving everything here, Firm you, this city?" Natalie laughed. "I'm not going anywhere, and D.C. isn't that far. Besides, after everything that's happened, can you really go back to just being a regular attorney at Mason and Fletcher? You've outgrown that role, Caroline." Caroline looked down at her grandmother's cross, the small gold symbol that had started this whole journey. What had begun as a simple stand for personal conviction had opened doors she never could have imagined. "Think you're right," she said finally. "It's time for a new challenge." She picked up her phone to call Diane Baldwin. Caroline felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had experienced before. The path ahead might be difficult, but she was ready for it. She had found her calling. 6 months had passed since Caroline had moved to Washington, D.C. to join Constitutional Rights Partners. The city was different from her hometown, bigger, busier, and filled with the energy of people working on issues that affected the entire country. Caroline had rented a small apartment near DuPont Circle, just a short metro ride from her new office. On this particular morning, Caroline stood before her bathroom mirror, getting ready for an important day in court. She wore a well-tailored black suit, and around her neck hung her grandmother's gold cross. The necklace had become something of a symbol for her, now a reminder of where her journey had begun. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane Baldwin, the senior partner who had recruited her. "Big day. Are you ready?" Caroline smiled and texted back, "Ready as I'll ever be." Today she would be arguing her first case before the Federal Appeals Court. The case involved a high school teacher who had been fired for having a Bible on his desk. Like Caroline's own case, it raised important questions about religious expression in public settings. As Caroline gathered her briefcase and notes, she thought about how much her life had changed since that day in Judge Morris's courtroom. Case had received national attention after Judge Peters' ruling. Legal journals had published articles about it, and religious freedom. Advocates had cited it in other cases across the country. The subway was crowded with morning commuters as Caroline made her way downtown. She used the time to mentally review her arguments one last time. This case was more complex than her own had been, with more parties involved and higher stakes. But the core principle was the same: the right to personal religious expression. Even in government settings, Diane was waiting for her on the courthouse steps. At 55, Diane was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in Washington. She had taken Caroline under her wing from day one, recognizing her talent and passion for constitutional law. "Nervous?" Diane asked as they climbed the steps together. "A little," Caroline admitted, "but good nervous." "Excited nervous." Diane smiled. "You've prepared more thoroughly than anyone I've ever worked with. You know this case inside and out. Just remember to speak clearly and stay focused on the constitutional principles, just like you did in your own case." Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. This case had attracted attention from religious groups, civil liberties, organizations, and education policy experts. Caroline recognized several reporters she had spoken with over the past few months as they set up their materials at the counsel table. Caroline was surprised to see a familiar face enter the courtroom. It was Judge Henry Morris. He spotted her and nodded in greeting before taking a seat in the gallery. "Is that who I think it is?" Diane whispered. "Yes," Caroline said, still surprised. "Judge Maurice, the one who fined me for wearing this." She touched her cross. "What's he doing here?" "I have no idea." Before she could think about it further, the bailiff called the court to order, and the 3 judges of the Federal Appeals Court entered. For the next 2 hours, Caroline was completely focused on the case. She presented her arguments clearly and responded confidently to the judge's questions. The opposing counsel, representing the school district, was experienced and skilled, but Caroline felt she had made the stronger case. When the hearing concluded, the chief judge announced they would issue their ruling within 30 days. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Karoline gathered her papers. She felt good about her performance, regardless of the outcome. Ms. Leavitt. She looked up to find Judge Morris standing before her. Judge Morris, this is a surprise. I hope you don't mind that I came, he said, when I heard you were arguing. This case, I wanted to see it for myself. Not at all, Karoline said. This is my colleague, Diane Baldwin. Judge Morris shook Diane's hand. Ms. Baldwin. Your firm's reputation is well deserved, and Ms. Leavitt was excellent today. She certainly was, Diane agreed. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with our client. She moved away tactfully, leaving Karoline and Judge Morris alone. You've come a long way in 6 months, Judge Morris said. Karoline smiled. It's been a whirlwind, that's for sure. I've followed your career since you left, he continued. Your case-hour case has made quite an impact. It has, Karoline. Agreed. Judge Peters' opinion has been cited in 12 other cases involving religious expression. Judge Morris nodded. No, I've read them all. He paused. I owe you a debt of gratitude, Ms. Leavitt. Gratitude? Karoline was puzzled. Yes. You taught me an important lesson about the law and about myself. He looked at her thoughtfully. After our case, I began to examine other areas where I might have been too rigid in my thinking. I've made some changes in how I run my courtroom. What kind of changes? I'm more careful about distinguishing between personal expression and institutional endorsement. I'm more aware of how my rulings affect real people, not just legal principles. I even reversed myself in a similar case last month, a juror who wore a small Star of David pendant. My clerk nearly fell out of his chair when I ruled it was protected expression. Karoline was touched. It was rare for a judge to admit to such. A fundamental shift in thinking. I'm glad to hear that, she said sincerely. That's all I ever wanted for the law, to protect everyone's right to personal expression. They talked for a few more minutes before Judge Morris had to leave to catch his flight home. As Karoline watched him go, she felt a sense of closure. What had begun as a confrontation had led to growth for both of them. Outside the courthouse, Diane was waiting with their client, a quiet man in his 40s who had lost his teaching position because of his faith. Thank you for fighting for me, he told Karoline. Whatever the court decides, I'm grateful that someone stood up for my rights. Later that evening, Karoline called Natalie to tell her about the day. You'll never guess who showed up in court today, she said after describing the hearing. Who? Natalie asked. Judge Morris? No way. What did he want? Karoline explained their conversation. It was strange but nice, like everything had come full circle. Life is funny that way, Natalie said. One moment you're being fined for wearing. Across, the next, you're a big-shot constitutional lawyer in D.C. Karoline laughed. I wouldn't say big shot, exactly. Oh no. Saw you on CNN last week talking about religious freedom cases. My friend Lauren texted me. Isn't that your roommate? You're practically famous? It was true that Karoline had been asked to comment on several recent cases for news programs. Her own story had made her something of a spokesperson for religious freedom issues after they hung up. Karoline went to her window and looked out at the Washington skyline. The city was beautiful at night, with the monuments lit up against the dark sky. She thought about how differently her life might have turned out if she had simply removed her necklace that day in court. It would have been the easier choice, the path of least resistance. But that small act of standing, her ground had set her on a new path, one where she could make a real difference in people's lives. She touched her grandmother's cross, feeling its familiar shape under her fingers. Next week, she would be speaking at Harvard Law School about religious freedom and the Constitution. The month after that, she would be helping Diane prepare a brief for a case that might go all the way to the Supreme Court. The work was challenging and sometimes overwhelming, but Karoline had never felt more fulfilled. As she turned away from the window, her phone pinged with an email notification. It was from a law student in California who had read about her case and was inspired to pursue constitutional law. This was the third such message she had received this month. Karoline smiled as she wrote a thoughtful reply. She was no longer just fighting her own battles, she was helping others fight theirs, all because she had stood up for what she believed was right. Even when it would have been easier to back down, sometimes the smallest actions led to the biggest changes. Sometimes a simple gold cross could become a powerful symbol of justice.